What's up, guys? Just wanted to jump on here really quick. I got asked a couple questions from some of my buddies who were at some of my clinic talks at Michigan, at the Michigan Track Cross Country Coaches Association. And the questions that were asked by Jessica were as followed. How do you assess for throws, pole vaults, and hurdles? The other question is, why do you use cartwheels, round-offs, backflips, and walking on your hands as one of the tools that we use to test? And then finally, what do you use to assess flexibility, the measurement of, things like that? And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to create a battery of tests, both psychologically and using some of the stuff that I've done for my questionnaires, in terms of words, drawing, artwork, favorite quotes, history of athletic experience, all this kind of stuff. And what I've done is put that together to try to assess the entire person in a whole lot of different ways to get insight in who they are and what makes them tick without being incredibly intrusive. And so that's a really, really important concept that I hope most of you guys kind of understand and what I'm trying to do as a coach. And so one of the talks that I do is, how to overdrive your track and field program by using data collection and testing and stuff like that. And, people give lip service to this, but I don't know how many people think about it practically. So for us, when they say, how do we assess the throws and pole vault and the hurdles? Well, each of these things kind of happen on a different day. So like day one in my program, every kid runs a standing 30 meter, a flying 30 meter, a standing long jump, standing 5 repeat bounds, a overhead shot put, which is the girl shot put toss backwards, a softball throw, then a basketball throw for testing the javelin, because we have javelin in Missouri. Then the other thing we do is we do the cartwheels, the round off, the backflip, and walking on your hands or doing a handstand. Now, the question that she was asking is, well, why do all that? Well, I want to know how bodily aware these people are. A lot of times what ends up happening is like you'll have athletes who maybe came out for cross country or they did a different sport and you really don't know anything about them, or they might be, a cheerleader or have some other gymnastics background. But if you don't see them try to do some of those things, and granted, like if you can't do a cartwheel, then you don't advance to the round off. If you can't do a round off, you don't advance to the backflip, right? And if you can't do that, then we don't try to have you walk on your hands. And what we're trying to figure out is how spatially aware are these athletes when they're not on the ground, when they're upside down, and we're moving their center of mass all over the place. And so that is really, really important when you think about how you're trying to assess athletes, because you don't really know what they can do. And so this gives you an idea of like, hey, that person I think could really be a pole vaulter, because if you can do all of those different skills, you are aware in space, you can handle the center of mass being turned upside down, you can handle body control when you are in positions that are not supported. Things like this are very useful for trying to evaluate whether or not, when we're trying to think about the beginning of our season, sliding our athletes into different mailboxes depending on their skill sets and their abilities and all that kind of stuff. It's really important when you consider that concept of what we are trying to. Now, that being said, sorry guys, I was jumping on and off there. But that being said, one of the things that we want to remember with this is also that none of this stuff is 100% accurate. So when you put these things together, the other thing you're trying to get out of this testing is trying to figure out like where to start. And then through performance and training and things like that, allow us to then dictate where the athlete's going to go. So I'm going to call somebody out who's actually watching right now, which is Lizzie Dejois. So Lizzie was one of the fastest girls in her grade as a sprinter. But then what we ended up finding out is as she went farther and farther and farther, she got better and better and better from the 100 to the 200 to the 400. and eventually becoming the fastest female in Missouri in the 800, and also having the ability to run cross country, and was all state and all metro in cross country. We would have never known that if we didn't also rotate these kids through different events. So you have to rotate them through more than just one event. No one owns an event. And even if this kid could be really good in this one thing, you're not entirely sure until you see them perform in a whole bunch of other events if that's actually their best event. So we do a lot of these different tests for different reasons. Now, I kind of told you what we do on day 1. Day 2, for the new kids, we do a hurdle skill challenge. So we start with the mini hurdle, then we start with the foldable hurdle that can fall down on itself. Then you have the soft hurdle that's basically like a big pillow. And then they graduate to the hurdle that actually is a real hurdle. And we have it at the lowest height. And I always stand over it. I'm only 5'8" and a half, but I can stand over the hurdle for the young women, which is the height for the 300 hurdles. And they can see, I can literally stand over it. So no one should be afraid at that height to try to cross over that barrier. And we see who, runs up and naturally is aggressive, who has a nice lead trail leg, who can land without folding out underneath themselves, looking like they collapse kind of backwards and then move forward. And we kind of keep a little mental scorecard with that. We show them how to do it with the athletes who have hurdled before, so they can kind of see the example of what the other athletes do, so they can kind of get their mind around what that looks like and how it's supposed to be. And one of the things with these tests too is every kid in my program does these tests every year. And the reason why we do this is because what ends up happening is a lot of athletes learn vicariously through watching other athletes. So that first year, it's they couldn't do it. They don't know how to do it, but they come back as sophomores or juniors and seniors. And they're like, oh dude, I totally get how to approach the hurdle and how to attack. And one of the things as a coach I want to do is I try to philosophically treat all of my athletes like they're decathletes or heptathletes until they're not. And then we start to whittle away different events that we know maybe they're just not going to have a lot of success in, or try to narrow it down. But then everybody's a hurdler until they're not, because again, you cut down on the number of athletes who are even willing to do that. Then once we figure out whether they can hurdle or not, then everybody's a quarter miler until they're not. And then from there we move up or down or do field events or whatever it may be. So the hurdle skill challenge and my philosophy kind of is laid out like that for the first 2 days. After we do the hurdle skill challenge on day 2, the returning distance kids and all of my rookies, minus people who are very large and kind of hefty throwers, we will then go run an 800. Now, we used to do a mile. The problem with the mile is kids don't do it anymore because for some reason in PE class we're afraid to have kids do physical fitness and score them and grade them. So then we do this test that no kid quite understands how to do it. And it's the beeper test. And then it's really terrible because you're never really getting accurate numbers on the kids and how they're crossing. It's ridiculous. But anyway, that's the reality that we live in. Kids are more on the couch than they've ever been. They play outside less than they've ever played. And then again, in PE class, we can't, grade kids for their fitness anymore. So they do things to avoid that, which I think is silly, especially when we think about all sorts of stuff when it comes to health and life expectancy. It's look, if there's one thing we want kids to be, maybe not feeling great about for a day, but also the benefit of them getting in shape and having to get in shape and having to get healthier, I think the juice is worth the squeezing. And I think the positives way outweigh the negatives of feelings, once a year on a test like that. And again, I think you should be doing it all the time so that the test isn't embarrassing, because we want to see growth just like we would in a chemistry class. All right. Anyway, I digress. So for the 800, we do that because pretty much any kid can run 2 laps around the track and just run. And it's not necessarily we're racing or anything, but we test and we tell them we want you to go as fast as you can. And we see who's aggressive. We get an idea of the time, and we can start to make some assessments based on what we see. And of course, the returning distance kids that do that test, we use that as a means in which to establish what our training times will be for other distances. So we derive, like what they might do for a 600, 1,000, a 1,200, an 800, a mile, 400, all those things, all the different intervals. We can derive times from that at the very beginning of the season, and it gives us a starting point instead of just saying, hey, go out here and run at this percentage of effort or whatever, because that's not very valuable, in terms of overall getting them where they need to be. And then when we talk about like flexibility, one of the things that you can do is most of us have a trainer for our school. And I think what you should do with that is use the trainer to do like a functional movement screen. Okay, so having them do the functional movement screens can give you a better idea of like whether the athlete can move well, where are gaps in their balance or mobility. And then that trainer can kind of create some homework, if you will, for those athletes to do on their own. And us as coaches can kind of prescribe things too. Things that will allow them to articulate the joint better, balance better, or for us just to be aware that this kid is probably a mess movement-wise, and that we need to be on top of them to make sure that they don't get themselves in a position where it would be obvious injuries. And so those are things we can do. For me, I rotate all of our suppleness, that's what I call it, our suppleness training as we move throughout the year. So we've got like 3 to 4 weeks. We have different phases every 3 to 4 weeks, and we change that. That our warm-up changes and evolves. Our suppleness, leg swings or static stretching, each one of those evolve. Our running drills evolve, and even our workouts evolve. And so what we're trying to do there is have some consistency doing these things with a twist. So like if we're going to go to the weight room, we're going to squat all year, but we're going to squat with a twist. So we might squat heavy, we might squat fast, we might squat on a single leg, etc. Right? When it comes to flexibility, we might have, static stretching that's very basic, kids on their own. Then the second phase of static stretching would be everything's partner stretched. So that stuff really increases mobility because now the kids are more comfortable with each other. They probably have a friend on the team. We do a thing called Big Sisters and Little Sisters, where every kid has a big sister on the team and a little sister on the team. And that way that they know, like, kind of, they're all like got a best friend on the team right when they join, kind of have another mini coach to help them, through the paces on drills, warm up, cool down, stretching, and in the weight room on the rack. So that way, as a coach, you can be attentive, but also you have a bunch of people who are attentive for their teammates as well. And I find that to be incredibly useful in regards to what we're trying to get done with our training, but also to teach some of these things. Okay, so you have your partner stretches for phase 2. Then phase 3, we do PNF, right? So where you're pushing against a particular limb and then they resist against you, then they're supposed to relax and you push them farther. And so that would be like phase 3. And then usually in the championship phase, we kind of pick a little bit of everything that we really like, which are kind of like the most important flexibility aspects. And we put that together in its own module. And so while I think people like what they're trying to do with this test that they asked me about, that Jessica was talking to me about, was like, well, how do you feel about sit and reach toe touches? I don't know that that's necessarily important. And here's why. Because each hip or each set of hips on each human is going to be slightly different. They're going to be set up different. They're going to have longer levers. And what's interesting, and I don't think people understand this, but the majority of people's height difference is in their femur. So like when you think about that, it's like, well, the sit and reach is going to be very, very different depending on the length in the femur. Like I actually have a pretty long torso, but then I'm pretty stubby outside of my torso. So when I sit, I look a lot taller than I am when I stand because I'm, pretty big in the torso, but my femur is definitely not very, very long. So I could probably and I did when I got really, really flexible for doing a lot of static stretching when I was in college and things like that to try to avoid hamstring injuries and to be as mobile as I possibly could be. I was able to fold myself almost in half, touch my head to my knees and put my hands all the way down flat on the floor without having bent legs. while that was good for me because of my hamstring issues, a lot of your sprinters and speed power people, they're going to be real sinewy. They're going to have, kind of some rigidity to their movements. So what we're looking is not to make an athlete like Gumby, but what we are absolutely trying to do is make an athlete optimal, right? So if they cannot get their knee in front of their body when they're contacting the ground in that really nice 4 position, right, where you've got the good front side with the foot cocked up in dorsiflex position and the leg is right under center of mass, and they can't get that thigh kind of parallel with their belly button, then they're not flexible enough, right? If it is impeding their ability to open up the stride and pull through it and cycle through, they're not flexible enough. But do we need them to be able to kick their leg all the way up in front of them and hit their nose? Absolutely not. We don't need that. What we need is optimal suppleness, optimal movement. And so in the combination of doing a functional movement screen with your trainer, having the different phases for static flexibility, and then also having an understanding of how much is flexible enough, I think you're going to be in a good spot. Now, the other thing I noticed, Jessica, here is you have some tests that are in here. Your 200 is in there as well. I would absolutely not do the 200 because you already have the standing 30 and the flying 30 on your testing. And what you can do with that is you can take those two numbers, round them up, add them together. Okay? And when you add those two numbers together, you now have a 60. You're going to be able to take that 60 meter and predict and derive a 100 meter dash from that. And then because you can derive a 100 meter dash from that, you can also get an idea then and derive what you think you can do in a 200. Now, I am currently creating a book that is a enhanced version of a lot of different charts. So I've taken stuff from the World Championships, looking at the top performers from the standing 10 all the way out, taking times that were the fastest times from 60 meters to 90 meters to derive a fly 30. All right. And I've done miles per hour, kilometers per hour, meters per second. And I've done it from standing 10, flies, all the way out to 2,000 meters, then continuous runs, and then deriving different levels of those athletes. So we have at level 30, you have a theoretical athlete at 100%. And then from there, you've got different rep prescriptions so that you can derive training for different reasons, right? So if you do let's say 3 reps of 150 with 15 minutes recovery, okay, well there's going to be a percentage of effort that you're probably running at, which is probably somewhere between 93 to 95%, okay, unless it's assisted by wind. And that means that's how much recovery you're going to need. This is going to be the intensity you're going to be at. And if you're at 95% of whatever that is for 150, a time will be derived from that. And again, when you're trying to do these type of tests, you got to really ask yourself, why the 200 and why that early? Now, that being said, when we get to 3 weeks or 4 weeks into the season, then we do time trial. We typically time trial that 4th or 3rd week with a 400, and we do that first because, again, everybody but the big mama throwers need to run a 400 in my program. Okay, and that's what we start with to set the tone of everybody's going to do this, and everybody's going to try hard, and everybody's going to run, and we're going to be competitive. And we get the gun out, and they're spiked up. We don't do blocks because not all the kids can do blocks, especially kids who are distance kids, but we can run. And then I try to gamify who I put where in what heat to try to get all of the girls to perform really well, and especially girls that I think are new that need a little bit of oomph to get a big performance out of them. Then what we do is we usually have a day of active recovery after that Monday, and then we come back and the sprinters run a 200 and the distance kids run a mile. Okay, and again, they won't do both. They'll do one or the other, and that's how we do that with time trials. And that'll be the only time trials we do because everything else can be taken care of in competition and stuff like that. Now, I do need to go back to the first week. So after we go Monday with the fly 30, standing bound, standing 5 repeat bound, standing long jump, overhead medicine ball tosser, shot put toss, softball toss, gymnastic skills. Then we come back Tuesday, hurdles, then we do the 800. Then from there, the third day is when we actually have them kind of get a feel for the shot put, get a feel for the discus, and get a feel for the javelin. Now, why do we do that on the third day? Because you've just run for 2 days, and a lot of the kids have not run for a day, let alone 2 days, and let alone with what could be considered pretty intense, even though the volume is very low. So we want to give them a day of rest, but we do want to see what they can do in terms of release. Do they have any abilities? And you and I both know that obviously throwers need their legs, okay? But for this particular thing, we just want to see, do they have any talent in that particular area? Then usually on Thursday, we come back and the kids try to actually high jump. And we see if they can pole vault and get up in a pole vault run and get in the sand and reverse on the sand in a pole vault run. And that's what we'll do on a Thursday. Then typically Friday will be the day that we might try to teach, seeing if they can long jump a little bit, see if they can triple jump. And then we actually do go on Saturdays the first couple of weeks because we need to get a certain number of practices in before our first competition. And we have to get 14 days of practice in before our first competition. And it's always like day 15 is a track meet, track and field meet. So we practice on Saturdays. Saturdays is where I typically teach them how to come out of the blocks, how to run how to come out of the blocks on a curve and a straightaway. I teach them our process of how we get in the blocks and how we set up the blocks. And we have a process. We have a ritual that we do to do that. And I teach that on Saturday. And we do some race modeling with that, with the 150, where we set up cones as well. So that's my first week. That's all my testing. That's all the stuff that I do for the first couple of weeks of the season. Hopefully it's a good enough explanation of why and kind of how we do it. So Jessica, I hope you found this helpful. I know you wanted me to write all this down, but for me to write all this down would take me hours versus just talking directly to a bunch of people who I think would really benefit from this besides just you guys. So I appreciate you asking me the questions, and I appreciate you coming to my sessions. And again, a lot of this stuff, almost all of this stuff, is in my original version of the Sprinter's Compendium. So the one that was released in 2017. All of this is in here, all the different workouts, all the different trainings, all the different progressions, all the different setup that we do. Now, I guess there is one more thing before I let you go that if I didn't say it, I'd be mad at myself. We divide all these athletes up on that Monday of the very first day of practice, and we do it round robin style. So my pole vault coach is with the gymnastics people. My throws coach is with the shot put, overhead toss, and the softball toss. My jump coach is with the standing long jump and the 5 repeat bounds. And then the distance coach helps me run off the standing 30-meter run and the 30-meter fly. So he's there for that. Day 2, hurdle coach, which is Coach Warren, really, for the most part. He's there to watch the kids hurdle and kind of figure out who can do that and start targeting people that we can throw in the hurdles. And then, of course, my distance coach is there to watch the 800-meter kids. Then on Wednesday, the throw coach is obviously there for the shot, discus, jav. Pole vault coach is there for Thursday, right? And then the high jump coach takes them on Thursday. And we usually split that group up too. So one group will go for pole vault, one group will go to high jump, and then we switch. And this is for new kids and kids who do the event, right? So the kids who do the event aren't just standing around. They're helping you coach. They're helping demonstrate. They're helping show you the right way to do all that stuff. So they're there to facilitate things for you as well, right? Then we come back and we do the long and triple jump, see if people can do that. And then I am the one who's running the show on Saturday for all the new kids. Now, meanwhile, other kids are doing other things on those days when they're not demonstrating. So like if you're a full-time thrower, dude, you're still going, and throwing on those days. People who are sprinters who obviously can hurdle or whatever, they're running with me and sprinting, and we're doing training on those days. Also, when it comes to the weight room, typically the first day that we introduce them to the weight room is going to be Thursday of that first week at the earliest. And why is that? Because I like to link up speed power days when we're doing powerful stuff. And obviously in the weight room, you're trying to develop strength, power, and momentum. And so that's when we'll usually lift weights. Again, when we demonstrate the weightlifting for the first time, a big sister is very important to be in the rack with them, to show them how to bench, how to squat, to spot them, to teach them the different exercises and stuff. And I'll be in there too, or an assistant coach, but just in terms, again, of how we teach that. And the first time we go in and lift, guys, listen, you don't need to do all the sets and all the exercises. Don't do that. Okay, if you do that, they're going to be extremely sore, and you're going to blow up like 3 days of training. So you have to do enough that you don't fatigue them out of this world, but you have to do a little bit so that way, you can get it going. So I think that's it. And then when we get into actual practices and intervals and training and all that kind of stuff, again, that is based on what they do in time trials at first to then derive all the rep percentages, all the number of reps, and how that intensities play out, right? And that chart system is really important for predicting what workouts can do. And at first, we do a thing called date pace, which is kind of like what all these times kind of say the kid can do at that moment. But eventually what we do is we try to go to goal pace. And so goal pace is usually about 2.5% faster than what they've maybe done. Now, obviously, they're not going to do that in a sprint that is at that distance, because that means they would be PRing in practice. But what we're looking at for them to do is we're like, all right, can we amp up a recovery run, which is aerobic for a distance kid, but maybe we can go a little bit faster on this. Maybe you can do a little bit more because you're probably a little bit better than you originally were, right? Then on top of that, okay, when they're going shorter, you can absolutely go that 2.5 to maybe even 5% faster, because we're trying to train the body to be able to handle and deal with the intensity and efforts that eventually we want them to get to. Now, that being said, though, when we look at when they PR, let's say they do PR in a competition, all right, or maybe in training, which would be weird, but new kids will PR all the time because they haven't done it that much. So they're so out of shape that the gains that they're going to have and these improvements are going to be so rapid and so massive. Now, as enticing as it may be to bump them up and to increase their training and increase the intensities and start dialing them into the next chart, right? The next level. So going from a 27 level to a 28, right? As they move up the rankings, right, of their levels, kind of like a video game with this book that I'm making called The Trainer's Companion. You're not supposed to do that until about a week or two later. Because what you want to do when they PR for the first time in a long time, or if they're PRing a lot, you want to stabilize the new them, right? So they're making gains, right? So you don't need to screw with them too much, because if they're making gains and then you overreach and get them hurt, well, then you've just blown that athlete up. So I would rather say, hey, it's really great that we have these PRs, but we're still going to stay at this level. Your percentages of effort are going to still be based off of this time and this speed, okay? And so that way the athletes know, hey, I have PR'd, but you don't know how that PR happened, right? It could have been fluky. It could have been because there was a 1,000-mile-per-hour wind behind them. It could have been because the guy finally got a date with the cutest girl in school that he never thought he had a chance with, and he's just filled with dopamine and just on cloud nine, right? So for me, I want to stabilize the new them if given a chance, right? Because as you get to the end of the season, you're running out of time. There might be some things you would do differently because of that. But I would still even argue, do no harm, right? So we don't want to amp them up too much. We'll just let those progressions keep coming. But if you're in the early part of the season, the middle part of the season, give them a week or two. Also, if it's a PR from a competition or a competitive event, Don't put them in that event next week if you don't have to. Again, district, sectional, state, regionals, whatever it may be, okay, then you have to do some things differently. They're going to have to run that event if that's their best event, even if they're PRing. But if they are in the beginning of the year or the middle of the year, we do not need to do that. Rotate them out, give other athletes a chance to prove to you how great they can be, okay? And you can figure out like, okay, that kid might be my number one kid, but who's my number 2, 3, 4? Who are my backups? Who are my reserves? Who are my other legs on a relay? So you've got to give other kids a chance to compete and see how they respond to varsity competition, high-level competition, in more intense circumstances and situations. If you do that, then you're going to have a great number of options. You're going to have kids with a ton of success in a bunch of different events. And then when the end of the season comes along and coaches are trying to cue off of what you're doing with your lineup, like a chessboard, right? They're not going to be 100% sure what you're going to do. And in addition to that, by rotating all of these different kids into all of these different events, you're creating a great profile for them to get recruited if they want to go to college. Like, hey, yeah, I did the long jump and I threw the shot put. We had a girl do that, right? So we had a girl that was the school record holder in the discus, and she was all state on our 4x1. And she was a state qualifier in the shot put. And she was also a sectional qualifier in the 300-meter hurdles. Like, these are great things. All right, so Mike, to answer your question, do we alternate days and paces? 100%. You know, there are days where we are at maximum effort. There are days where we're at speed reserve. There are days we are at tempo. There are days when we're doing recovery. And then within that, depending on who they are, right? If they are a distance person, we 100% start working on goal paces, because you can always go a little bit shorter, right? But over intensify, right? And you can do that with sprinters too, especially when you're looking at like fly 60s or something a little bit longer, but not at the exact distance, right? So we can do that. A lot of fly-in sprints, right? Instead of just doing standing acceleration, doing fly-in sprints, even at the 150 and 120 distance, are excellent to try to derive, right, a better pace as they fly in, right? So you're starting at the 120, but you're not starting the clock until they get to the 100. And so those are ways that you can kind of manipulate the pace to get that stuff kind of moving in the right direction. Yeah, Jason Buster, Colt for life. I didn't think I was going to be that. And, when I graduated high school, I was like, I'm done with Parkway Central. And here I am, 46 years old, and every day of my life I'm going into that place and hopefully trying to change lives and make things better for the kids I get to work with. Heather, I really appreciate the compliment. That means a lot, dude. Means a ton. It'd be great to get a coffee sometime and catch up. And, the big thing that you have to understand with all of this stuff that I'm talking about today on this live is that these are things that I've had to develop and learn from a lot of mistakes over time. And if you're not thinking about it in this way, everybody's good at the what. What is easy to do? So like, what do you want to do in track? Well, you want to have fast kids. You want to have kids that throw far. You want to have a big team. That's the what. The how is how you actually go about accomplishing that task. And very few people like to talk about the how because they don't really know how, or they're afraid that they're going to get criticized and they have to defend the how. I don't mind defending the how, and I don't mind sharing the how, because at the end of the day, like, you get better as a coach, and now you're closer to us competitively because of some of the things you've borrowed from us to get better. Well, yeah, it's going to make it harder on me, but if I wasn't a coach that I think was worth a little bit of being a net positive, right, then I would hold that stuff to my chest and I wouldn't share it with anybody. I'd be a scarcity mindset person, but I'm not. I'm not anymore. I'm an abundance mindset person. I want everybody to get better. I want all of these kids to have a better and greater experience. And I want them to be healthy. And I want coaches to coach kids in the right way. And then at the end of the day, like the ultimate thing is like when we're looking at kids trying to get to national championships or be in the Olympics or whatever, the more kids that we have that are properly trained, the better chance that we could see some really cool things happen and not have to do some nefarious things like performance enhancing drugs or any of that scary, dangerous stuff. We could do it just the good old fashioned way, And then at the very lowest, most simple level, we're going to be able to keep kids happy and they're going to enjoy the experience and they're going to improve and they're going to come back. And the sport of track and field will be something that they can do for the rest of their life. You're going to be able to sprint and run and throw for a really long time. You might not be able to do it like you were when you were, somewhere between 17 and 24 years old at your physical peak, but you can do it for the rest of your life. And if you do it for the rest of your life, you're going to be better off for it. And your kids are going to be better off for you being able to know kind of what you're doing. And if you're a coach and a trainer or a parent that has a kid that you're kind of coaching, they're going to be better off because of it too. So these are good things we should be thinking about, things we should be doing. All right. I've talked for a really long time. Jessica, I hope that this really helped you out in general. And to the rest of you guys, thank you for popping on and sending me some good comments and all that kind of stuff. And hopefully you get some value out of this video for you with your kids and who you coach. And it's bedtime for me. So good night, guys.